discussing all the ideas, all the concepts, all the big themes at this year's Flame 2018. With me now is Richard Sarsfield-Hall, who's from Pöyry. Richard, thank you very much for joining me. How many years have you been coming to Flame now?
So I've been coming for 9 years in a row, so definitely a Flame diehard.
And a good year so far this year?
Yeah, no, absolutely excellent. No, very good.
You've been presenting one of your own reports
Yeah,
here.
absolutely. So we've been doing a major study looking at how you fully decarbonise Europe's energy system. And by energy, that means transport, heat, as well as power. Everyone tends to think about power, but they forget about transport and they forget about heat. And we did a major study looking at how the integration of all of those can lead to a fully decarbonised system. So hopefully something that policymakers like, because it gives them the answer they want, but a good challenge to the industry as well in terms of what is that role for gas into the future.
So tell me what you came up with then.
Okay.
Was it just one answer or several different scenarios?
Yeah, so we did two major pathways, one of which is where we allowed what we call zero carbon gas. So that's opportunities like hydrogen, biomethane, carbon capture and storage, allowed those to compete with all of the other technologies which are out there. And then we did an all-electric where we constrained those and said that the zero carbon gas isn't allowed, and said, can you still decarbonise heat and transport as part of that solution?
And what was your answer?
And the answer was that surprisingly the all-electric can be done, but you need a lot of new nuclear in particular. Whereas if you actually put a zero carbon gas into the solution, then actually that comes out with a better alternative. It's cheaper, you actually get more renewable energy in the power system, for example, but you can get hydrogen in transport, you can get hydrogen replacing natural gas where it's being used in heating people's homes, carbon capture and storage for helping to decarbonise industry. And these are the areas where, in the latter two about how you decarbonise homes and how you decarbonise industry, is the really big challenge. And if you don't allow zero carbon gas in that, that's going to be more expensive consumers and restrict the choice that you've got to get there.
But it does sound great on paper that it can be done. But I mean, you know, there's a lot in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, top of your list, what are the biggest challenges to getting to that end point?
So we would say that the biggest challenges are is that there's too much not in my backyard going on an element with policymakers at the moment, as well as the public
I was going to
perception.
say both policymakers and public.
So,
and this is because of sort of like short-term election cycles and the like.
An element of that, but also an element that comes from people saying, right, we don't want nuclear, we don't want carbon capture and storage, without understanding that if you preclude these, then the objective of full decarbonisation, which most people say is not only a laudable but an absolute must, is then constrained to the point where you can't actually get there. So I think sometimes people have to recognise there's a trade-off on these things. Which is more important, full decarbonisation, or I don't want nuclear, or I don't want CCS? So trying to get that message across to people that you can't just preclude things because you don't like it and still say I want this end game without having other consequences in particular.
Just out of interest, you were putting together CCS and nuclear in the same sort of NIMBYism there, and is that what you've sort of found in your research?
Well, we pick up on that. So when we talk to our clients and when we talk to people what's going on and we talk to policymakers, there's definitely an element within some countries, you know, they're either pro-nuclear or they're anti-nuclear. A lot of countries don't seem to understand what CCS does, film or not does. And people will say, oh, but how does this work for industry and what have we got to do on this basis? There's a risk of people sort of mixing things up and they start calling different things like brown hydrogen, green hydrogen, all of which rather confuses the issue, whereas actually what you need to be talking about is how do we decarbonise and how do we get a zero carbon gas to be an integral part. And I do mean integral because it's not it becomes a destination, not a transition as part of that.
Right, okay. Everything you're talking about involves money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, I don't know whether you've put figures on this or you've started.
So our analysis suggests that allowing zero carbon options gives you about €1 trillion between now and 2050 cheaper solution then if you preclude them and force things like nuclear having to be part of the solution.
So but does that include the cost of the infrastructure, the R&D? That's
absolutely.
the whole thing.
So it includes the costs of replacing your boiler with a hydrogen boiler, upgrading the gas network to do that, making electric cars and fast charging. It includes all of the, if you put an air source heat pump into somewhere where you've got radiators and you need bigger radiators. So all of those costs are there and they are real. But surprisingly, decarbonisation doesn't cost as much more than you might expect, because between now and 2050 everyone replaces their car, they replace their boiler. So actually if you make those be not so much more expensive, and an electric car shouldn't be that much more expensive in the future than an existing fossil fueled car, then actually it's not quite as expensive as you think it is.
You're talking about a very joined up policy, very sort of, sort of top line thinking here, but there are obviously many different industries underneath that, the transport industry, heating. So where do you see the individual challenges?
Well, first of all, I think if you don't look at them at an holistic, and that was criticised as a word, but if you don't look at that, then you miss some of the benefits that they can actually help support each other. They can be mutually supportive. So if you decarbonise transport by putting a lot of electric vehicles out there and say hydrogen vehicles, that actually gives a real benefit to the power network, because then you can actually mean that people charge at different points in time. You don't have to have a dumb system, which means that the costs get too great. Actually, then that flexibility now enables demand now to balance intermittent generation. A real problem in Germany and other places where you've got negative prices, you don't have negative prices anymore. So actually the things can be mutually supportive. And what's being missed at the moment is that people are thinking about, how do I decarbonise electricity, how do I decarbonise heat, how do I decarbonise transport, and they're not thinking actually that they can all support each other rather than being left in separate buckets.
You just said that you got criticism earlier for using the word holistic. That I think came from the Dutch Green Party, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Saying that the word holistic was sometimes used when actually there wasn't a clear plan. And I imagine you take some sort of umbrage at that.
No, I don't take umbrage. I think the point is actually what we're trying to say with this study is actually the more you look at it as an integrated solution, the more you realise you have got to solve these things in parallel. So you need to decarbonise transport at the same time as ensuring that the electric grid is expanded, made smart. These things have to be done in parallel. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself into, like, say, 2040 and realise you've left it all too far too late, and you'll never achieve decarbonisation by 2050.
Richard, I hope you have a very good time here at Flame. There'll be a lot of people who want to talk to you and debate with you as to various parts of the report, I'm sure. But for the moment, Richard, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.